start.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome, everybody, here and in person. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully, we will not have too many technical challenges here today. But we are very excited about this session. And we have quite an amazing panel. People are coming from Abuja, Kigali, London, and Germany. We have 5 panelists who are here with us virtually. So the idea and a genesis and motivation for this session was dialogue is something that Karuna Center has been engaged in since its inception over 25 years ago. And dialogue has been around in a lot of different forms and evolution. It sort of came out of the contact theory back in the 50s. And it is now being used a lot here in the US, increasingly. But the question is, what do we mean by dialogue? Because obviously there's all kinds of permutations, different uses, et cetera. And,
Is it good?
Is it good? When does it make sense? We have a number of questions that we're hoping, to hear from different perspectives of practitioners and academics on, what do we mean by it? When is it an appropriate approach to use in peace building? When is it not? What has the research actually told us? And we are very fortunate. We're fortunate to have all our speakers, but we have Linda Trop, who is a leading academic social psychologist at UMass, who is going to talk about her applied research looking at some Karuna projects actually in Rwanda. So that, I think, was going to be very interesting. But there's a lot of, there's a bit of concern, obviously, that people are using the term dialogue in a lot of different ways. And, there are risks, obviously, that sometimes you're using dialogue maybe not so informed about what some of the risks and the challenges are. So that's sort of the genesis a little bit behind here. I'm going to hand it to you.
Well, and I really wanted to do this session and to make sure it was recorded because as a field, we need our own refresher course and also look at the latest data to know what's working, what's not working. And one of my biggest challenges that I think is here in the United States, in the global north, overseas in conflict-affected and fragile states, you have USAID, you have the UN, you have the German government, right? You have development agencies that have come up with some standards. Now, I'm not saying it's always going to be right, but there are some standards. They'll put out a request for a proposal on something, and it will say what, based on lessons learned and failures. I'm not saying it's always perfect, and you would also have somebody to complain to. If I saw a really horrible project, you know exactly what I'm saying, I would call USAID or somebody and say, that is doing harm, that is terrible, that is a waste of money. We don't have anybody to call here in the United States or anywhere else. And so one thing we found is after the 2016 election, there has been a lot of dialogue, organizations, groups popping up that are like, I have a great idea. Let's get a blue and a red together. And now I'm not saying, well, I'll stop there in that one. But the problem is, we know, many of us know the risks of it and why you should and shouldn't be doing it. And but they are proliferating in the United States. I actually call it the Wild West here. And I'm going to give you an example. There was a piece of legislation that was trying to get through, and they got a Republican and Democrat sponsor, and it was about bridge building, and it was all about dialogue. And the senator's office, we have a very good relationship with, and I called them to say, this would not be funded under foreign assistance, so why do we think this is a good idea here? And they're like, oh. And it is fascinating to watch kind of the light bulb come on. And that's why I think this session is so critical. And then, of course, I started researching it because I needed a refresher. No, and then I found Linda's work.
Yeah.
And I was like sending it out to everybody on the Hill. And so that's what this is.
Yeah.
This is a refresher course.
That's what it is a bit of a real look at some of these fundamental questions. And can we get the PowerPoint? I see it's coming.
And we need somebody to complain to in the United States.
Okay, Liz wants somebody to complain to, but I think it is going to be very interesting to hear. So the idea is we have these 5 different speakers, and I'm going to introduce them all soon. I'm just hoping that they're
there.
They're there.
Linda
They're
said
just
she's
not
on there.
We're just not seeing them.
No,
that's all.
she said they're there.
Okay. I'm going to introduce them, and the idea is we're going to hear from all of them first, with Linda Trop from UMass, the professor who's done the academic studies after the 4 of them speak. And then I think we're going to really get into, so what do we know? What have we learned? And how does that inform our thinking about going forward? As to Liz was saying, is it something that there should be more work thinking about standards here in the U.S.?
Yes.
And I really think, yes, well, somehow already have an answer to that.
Check. That one's done.
But also the question of, of how, how also, it is one approach for, a different dialogue can be used at different levels. How does it fit in to other approaches, peace building wise? Does it fit in? Is it a standalone thing? Can it be sustained? How the gains that have been made? So there are a lot of questions that I think will come out of this. So I'm going to turn now to hear from the panelists and then Linda. So I'm going to quickly introduce them all. First of all, we have Dr. Fatima Akilu, who is the executive director of the Neem Foundation in Nigeria.
And she's fantastic.
And she is fantastic. She is fantastic. Neem is a partner with Karuna in a program we have called Protecting Our Communities in Nigeria. So we've been working with them for some time. She is a trained psychologist with over 20 years of experience in mental health, including training and work here in the U.S. And she's written a lot. She also worked for the government of Nigeria a while back, and she authored their first countering violent extremism strategy, which she really pioneered. She's also currently a visiting professor at King's College in the UK, and she's developing a curriculum for them on mental health and peace building. Talk louder or be closer. Next, we're going to have Seth Karamage, who is joining us from Kigali, Rwanda. He is Rwandan. He is an associate and board member of the Karuna Center, and he's currently serving as the technical lead on this project in Nigeria that we are managing with Neem. And he completed his graduate studies at Brandeis, and he spent 6 years in Nigeria planning and coordinating projects designed to promote interreligious coexistence and peace building. And he was a dialogue coach in Karuna's project in Rwanda, as well as serving as the technical advisor currently in Nigeria. Linda Trop is a professor, as I've already said, of social psychology at UMass and highly regarded. She did a huge, I think she'll probably refer to it, meta-analysis in 2006 on intergroup contact. That is really her expertise. So for more than 2 decades, she has sought to promote the dual goals of fostering positive relations between groups and greater social equality and justice. And she really is a leader in applying her research and putting it into action. She's worked with lots of organizations, IOM, the World Bank, and others. Recently did a report with Beyond Conflict that some of you might have seen on social divides here in the U.S., and worked with lots of different NGOs, including Karuna, to evaluate programs that bridge differences. And you're going to hear about that from her.
She's fantastic, too.
She's fantastic, too. We have a lot of fantastic people here.
Everyone's fantastic.
We have Dr. Sarah Bernstein, who is the executive director of the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue in Jerusalem. Born and brought up in the UK with a background as a lawyer and mediator. For over 20 years, she's been working in the field of peace building and coexistence work, specializing in interreligious dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis. And she's published widely and I guess was a member of the Alliance for Peace Building Global Advisory Council. And lastly is Sabine Exner-Krikorian, who gained practical experience in the interreligious field as a working student in the Jewish community and dialogue facilitator. She worked as a project and office manager in the Cultural Center of the Jewish Community in Munich, and she's held numerous teaching positions and is working for the Eugene Bisser Foundation, heading their interreligious democracy education. So those are who we are very fortunate to have with us. And I think our thought was we would start with Dr. Akilu, talking first about her experience. We've asked them to talk broadly about their experience with dialogue, of when it's effective, the challenges, when it's most appropriate. So she will hear from Dr. Akilu first, and then we will hear from Seth, and then we're going to hear from Sarah and Sabine, and then Linda Trop from UMass will come after that. So with that,
And tell us what we're doing right and
and
wrong.
tell us what we're doing right along, we are going to turn to Dr. Akilu.
Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be on this panel with so many distinguished people working in the Peacebuilding space. I'm going to now turn off my video, if you don't mind, because I don't want to lose you all, and my bandwidth is quite poor. I will put it on later to answer questions, if you don't mind. Okay, so it's such a pleasure to talk about the work that NEAM Foundation has been doing with Corona Foundation across the middle belt of Nigeria. Before I talk a little bit about the work, I just want to say a few things that when you talk about dialogue and peace building, first of all, it is hard and it needs to be long-term. There are many setbacks along the way, and one must persevere. So the work that we do actually is mainly to bring two groups of farmers and herders together using dialogue. We've had decades-long conflict in Nigeria between farmers and herders for multiple reasons. And this has now got to a point where it is fueling conflict, and many lives have been lost as a result of that conflict. The kind of, I think if, one of the things that we first learned in this space is that to work in dialogue, you've got to understand the differences within the groups that you work with and also between the groups that you work with. Very often we bring groups together and we don't understand that there are differences even within groups. So that's one of the first things that we learned. We also learned that we must be aware of history, that culture is important in our region, so is religion. And without understanding each of these and the interplay between these three things, it's impossible to have dialogue. We needed to build trust, and without it, meaningful dialogue cannot occur. And when you build trust, it's multiple things. First, you have to understand the people. You have to be physically present. You have to be, you have to have the ability to listen, and not just to listen, but to hear. So that's also very important. We also had to build neutral platforms and understand the actors that you bring to the table, because some of them can cause more harm than good, or undo all the work that you've done. So those were the 5 or 6 main things that we had to contend with before we started the dialogue process. Along the way, we found that sometimes, dialogue is not new for us at all. It's an ancient tool to resolve conflict. It has many names in Nigeria. So all we're doing is reminding them to come together and offering a safe, neutral space for these two groups to air their differences. But we found that sometimes dialogue alone is insufficient. In our case, there were 2 things that made a difference or helped. One was to really look at what are the early warning signs of conflict and how we can resolve them very, very quickly using dialogue. So we had to build an early warning platform, and that has proved to be very effective. And the second is something that's really, really important and dear to me, which is mental health. I think we sometimes probably don't pay enough attention to how important mental health is in a dialogue process and in resolving conflict. We work in a ongoing active conflict environment. Everybody is traumatized. And very often when you bring them together without addressing their trauma, the dialogue doesn't always take the form that you want. So it's important to pay attention to that, to address people's trauma when you bring them to the table and make that continuous. So I just want to mention also what we found with doing this kind of dialogue is the importance of choosing the right partners. And you choose partners for many things: credibility, ability to build trust within communities, knowledge of the actual conflict, the two sides, and also the ability to sustain the program. So some of our partners are within communities, so they're local partners, but some are also within local, state, and federal government. For example, we work a lot together with Corona Foundation with the Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution in Nigeria. It's a federal institution, and partnering with them has allowed us to expand our reach. We've had a national conference and dialogue on farmer herder, but also to help us begin the process of institutionalize our dialogue effort even beyond this project. The second one is the Vice President's Office, where we are working to, again, institutionalize the structures of the early warning work that we have done. So our dream is really to have a whole of society approach that can curb violence and conflict with dialogue as its foundation. And I just want to talk very briefly, actually, about the limitations that we have encountered, and there have been quite a few. Some of it is political will. It's just not there by some stakeholders at every level of government. And that's been very frustrating because sometimes it slowed down the process. Again, there's a lack of consistency in policy direction by government agencies, a general limited understanding of the need for a non-kinetic approach, especially among security actors who are critical partners in this work. There's also limited long-term funding to create sustainable structures. This is both on the part of government and development partners. So people who work in this space know that this is long-term and you need to continue the effort, but very often projects have to stop because funding is limited. And in our case, we find that this over-reliance on foreign aid to support our peace-building initiatives sometimes actually can slow us down. We have a shrinking pool of experts, human capacity currently, because there's been a massive brain drain. So some of really talented people are leaving or have left the country. So this reduces the pool for us to call out actors to work in this space. But having said all of that, there are so many opportunities. One is that we notice increasingly that government agencies are starting to actively key into peace-building initiatives. So it really presents us all with greater opportunities. And religious leaders and ethnic leaders have been amazing. They're starting to understand the roles that they can play. And in my own experience and from what I've seen, they really have the trust and credibility on the ground, and they have been tremendous assets. The Nigerian government has also set up various committees to look into peace-building practices and strengthen connections between both state and non-state actors. There's a reprioritization generally of Africa by Western and Asian countries, which really represent us with a new or greater opportunity for development. And we've seen also a growth in civil society organizations who have built significant competence over the years in community dialogue. So this has cut across state and non-state actors. And these are real repositories for shared learning and best practices. And just to finish and round up is just to mention a few of the contextual issues around this space where we work. While we've been working for a few years in this area, we've seen increased levels of insurgencies, banditry, terrorism, agitation for successionist movements. The farmer-herder clashes have continued. In some cases, they have escalated, and there's also a lot of kidnapping. So it makes parts of the area very, very volatile. Even though we have seen some success, for example, during the election, the states and the communities that we worked with alongside Corona Foundation did not witness any pre or post-election violence. And when we asked why that was, because usually they're very volatile, they said that they had come together and continued the dialogue and had decided that they would not part in any post-election violence. So I think I'll just end by saying that even though I mentioned a lack of policy direction, I must say that this is getting better, and the opportunities for using dialogue has never been so rife, if you like. So I think that work in this space, we're very, very hopeful that this is an effective means of fostering peace within our communities. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akilu. And I hope you can hear clapping. That was a really excellent presentation. I mean, from, very practical base of preparing, selecting, et cetera, as to, the challenges, the trauma informed. I mean, you made so many excellent points that you covered a lot, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions.
So can I just get you ready for questions? We're going to go on to the next session, the next panelists, but I want you to be prepared for the lightning round of questions. One, what early warning system did you guys design? What exactly on mental health did you do? And how do you know not to bring somebody to the table?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So that's just to get prepared, Dr. Akilu. So I think we'll go to Seth. Now we're just going to go. We're going to go on and hear from everybody, even though that may not be ideal, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions for each person. I think it would really slow us down. So Seth, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. Can you hear me very well?
Yep.
Very good. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'll try really to be very brief, only that I would have wanted to share a lot of experiences on where I have practiced dialogue in transforming communities and societies. From my own country, where I'm speaking from, Rwanda, some of us here know the experience of what we went through the genocide we experienced in 1994. And also having worked in Nigeria, where we are working on protecting our communities project, and in different parts of the world where I have worked in Kenya, Somalia, and the US as well, trying to bring people together for them to understand their differences and forge forward for the next generation where they want to see themselves in a sustainable or an inclusive society. When I was thinking about the questions that you just discussed here, where is dialogue effective? Where should it be used? And how is it effective? For me, other than just talking about the experience or tangible examples of what I have seen with my own eyes from the work I've been doing from Rwanda and Nigeria specifically, I cannot emphasize enough what it is doing. where I have seen victims, survivors of genocide, embracing their former perpetrators just because of dialogue. And also seeing people who have been divided along religious and ethnic divides of values, calling themselves brothers and sisters. It's something that has always been, making me feel that this is the best way or the best approach to use in reconciling and promoting sustainable peace or coexistence among divided communities. And I also see dialogue as the best tool to at least make people understand that conflicts do exist among human beings. But the best tool to use for them to embrace their differences is just dialogue. I see people defining dialogue in debates that dehumanize others, to defeat them and overthrow them and maybe assume the power they have, which I think that kind of approach of regaining power or assuming power or overthrowing others or gaining benefits or interests is not sustainable in terms of peace building. I only see dialogue. And I'm embracing dialogue because I have tried all those other means that people do use actually to assume power or get power or gain their interest. People do get to power through debates, and they call them dialogues. They use gun muzzles. I held a gun, knowing that I'm fighting my own enemy. But I, at the end, understood that dialogue is something that can actually help people to understand their differences and live together, and can actually respect one another and appreciate their differences and see differences as tools or as resources that can help them even to develop further. So I've seen that in the communities I have worked from in Rwanda here, in our Corona program, that we promoted peace and reconciliation in different districts here in Rwanda. And in the end, the government of Rwanda, through its National and Reconciliation Commission, adopted the approach we built into these communities. And they are using now the documentary film that we developed through this program during the commemoration period promoting reconciliation among Rwandans. So this tells me that although I'm not in military holding a gun, but at least there's something that I can use and people have embraced, including the government, that at least makes the perpetrators, the people who were dehumanized, and the victims, the survivors who were dehumanized, to feel that they are all human beings and they can forge for an inclusive next generation. In Nigeria, I have also seen Muslims and Christians who have fought so terribly, killed one another, farmers and herders who have killed one another. But in the communities where we are now implementing the Protecting Our Communities program, just like Dr. Akilu said, they are testifying that we never used to call ourselves brothers and sisters, but through dialogue, we understand that we are all human beings with our differences in terms of beliefs and values, and respect for one another. It's difficult to achieve that, but at least there's some people who are starting to testify about that. It's not a debate, it's not a gun that can bring about that mutual respect. It is only dialogue. And I wish people could really understand the difference between a dialogue and a debate. I know there are so many scholars, there are so many teachers who can define that, can distinguish them, but there are so many people in the society that call dialogue what it is not, because dialogue is mutual respect. It's sympathy and empathy. So yes, we are doing that mostly at a community level. And like Dr. Akilu said, there is less political will. And when those that have power are not embracing these programs, their sustainability or achieving the broader benefit or goal is likely not to be achieved. Why is this? So this is where I see the challenge of where dialogue is actually facing obstacles. It is because leaders who are on power, who are in different positions, in policymaking, in schools, in places of worship, in local government leadership, they are not understanding the purpose and the benefit of dialogue. The reason being, it is also good to understand that they have their own collective memories. They come to power through debates. They assume these positions through debates. They assume these positions through gun muzzles. They fight, they shoot, and then they come to power, they overthrow those that are perceived to be their enemies. And when they get there, and here comes a non-government organization, a civil society organization, telling them that, please let us embrace dialogue. It is as if you are telling them that, look, give a chance to your former enemy or to your enemy to say that he or she wants to come and stay with you. That is very, very difficult for them to understand because of that collective memory of fighting for power or fighting for oppression. Those who have been oppressed for so many years, they fight to overcome the oppression, but they don't know that there's this tool that would actually promote sustainable peace, which is dialogue. So having observed that, we also see that, like Polly, and I think, I don't know the person who is on the panel on the table there, but you talked about, donors, funders, having their own policies or strategies or conditions to the practitioners, to the organizations. They tell them do this and that. And as a practitioner in dialogue, having worked on so many projects, dialogue projects, sometimes you find that it is very difficult for donor agencies to put their money into actually targeting these top leaders that I was mentioning. Engaging them into dialogue, it is very difficult because it is very expensive than engaging the community people. It's so expensive to bring ministers, local government authorities, or leaders, traditional leaders at higher level, religious leaders, into a dialogue, because it takes a long time to convince them, bringing them in very expensive venues, getting very experienced dialogue facilitators, bring them together. It's so difficult, and it is very expensive for donors. So that is a challenge that we are seeing as practitioners. Not only that, also, sometimes donors as well, they will mostly regard or consider the value for money. Value for money in terms of calculating and counting how many people have been reached out to, not considering the fact that dialogue is an attitude and a behavioral change tool that needs to be evaluated after a certain period of time, observing psychologically how the behaviors and attitudes of people or divided communities are. So that is also another challenge that needs really to be considered to make sure that at least dialogue can be implemented through all those segments. So what can we do as a recommendation from my own experience? It would be very, very important if, as we design, this is an appeal to whoever might be involved into peace building project designing consultancies or activities, to consider all these dots that I was talking about. Where do we put more money? And what dots don't we forget? What areas? That is the area. If we are really into peace building programs through dialogues, let us also not only just consider community-based programs, but also consider these high-level leaders who are very difficult to get into dialogue, but understand a very long journey in which we can bring them into dialogues for them to embrace it. So how can we do this? We could employ indirect programs that these leaders can actually listen to, just like we did in Rwanda. And now the documentary is being used at the national level through Karuna Center. we put a lot of effort into national media programs, promoting what we call media dialogues. These media dialogues, they get listened to by community people or rural people, but as well as policymakers, educators, and civil society leaders, or even people from religious settings. So this is very, very important. Another thing that needs to be really considered for peace building, more especially on dialogue, is a very, very high level advocacy program or strategy, which is supposed to be done through a lobbying strategy to get these leaders to listen to, because they don't want to come to the public to see that they are getting involved into dialogue, but there could be an underground dialogue where these people can start appreciating what is happening, and then they come out to the public to embrace dialogue. And then they try to reduce their ability and strategy to use debates. So another thing that I thought we could really do in terms of making sure that dialogue is embraced is promoting dramas, peace dialogue dramas. These are good education tools that would influence and change the attitudes of these leaders, because they sit in their own respective and private rooms and watch these dramas that promote dialogue, that show the difference between debates and show what really these dramas do mean for the sustainable peace that they are striving towards too. And then they try to embrace them and they start putting them into their policies. So this is something that I'm really appealing to make sure that as we put more effort into community-based programs, we should not forget about the high-level leaders who have their collective memories and who understand the pathways through which they have come to power through. So I always say that to design a very good dialogue program, we need to understand how the leaders of the country or of the nation who are implementing that program came through to becoming who they are, because they have their ideologies and they design these ideologies through the settings I mentioned earlier, which is through education system, through religious teachings.
Seth,
yes.
I think we kind of have to wrap to move on to the next person.
I'm done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a lot of great points. And sorry, we just don't have enough time, but we have 3 more people to hear from. So, Dr. Bernstein, Sarah, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, good evening, everybody. Or good evening, my time. I'm delighted to be with you and honored to have been asked to join this panel. So as somebody who's been doing dialogue in Israel-Palestine for over 20 years, I have a lot to say about the challenges and sometimes somewhat less to say about the successes. And as our previous speakers have already mentioned, the necessity of a long-term program, the necessity of real depth in the dialogue, and how one does that and at the same time reaches a significant number of participants and creates systemic change. Those are certainly some of the challenges that we at the Rossing Center continue to grapple with. I think one of the things that is clear in our context in Israel-Palestine, and one of the real challenges for dialogue, is the way that dialogue addresses power imbalances. Because I think there's sometimes a tendency to think as was mentioned by our hosts in the wider world, that dialogue can't do any harm, and dialogue can do harm, and therefore not all dialogue is good, and not all dialogue should be invested in. And one of the things that we have found is that dialogue has to address the power imbalances, and has to lead to action to create change, it isn't enough in and of itself. So one of the things that we grapple with is that sometimes we have a situation where Jews in Israel come to dialogue in order to listen, and they think that it is sufficient, that they have done their bit by coming into the room to listen to Palestinians. And they haven't done their bit. And it's not enough. We need to stemming from the dialogue, something else needs to happen. I think one of the reasons that Palestinians have become very disillusioned with dialogue is because for many years dialogue was taking place that didn't create change and that hasn't changed the realities on the ground. So how do we do dialogue in such a way that it challenges the status quo and does something to create change? So as I say, a lot of that is about addressing power imbalances. It's also about addressing the tendency to get into a dynamic of competitive victimhood, which is an incredibly destructive and unhelpful dynamic. And you know, it doesn't help for us all to just share our stories of victimhood and be convinced that we are suffering more than anybody else. One of the things I think one of my colleagues spoke earlier today about, we have developed a methodology based on tools of spiritual care as a different form of dialogue, which I think addresses trauma. There's an enormous amount of trauma in this part of the world, as I'm sure in so many others. So addressing the trauma sort of head on, and it's a form of, I call it a form of active witnessing to trauma. So it does something slightly different from regular dialogue, and we found that incredibly effective. Another thing that we find important is to have uninational sessions as well as binational sessions, that we get the Jews together in a group and the Palestinians together in a group to talk separately as well as coming together for the joint sessions, because they need the space to process what's going on in the mixed group. They sometimes need the sense to the space to work out some of their own intra identity group issues, and also it's part of addressing the power imbalances, because sometimes it's important to work with the less powerful group in order to give them more power, more agency, more ability to come together and to speak out in the mixed group. I think the question of legitimacy of you know, whether the dialogue is actually creating change is a question that we all have to answer, and one of the reasons that I think that real evaluation and thorough and demanding evaluation is necessary. We have recently taken a decision to not to discontinue one of our biggest dialogue programs in schools, but to make significant changes in the program, because we feel that it is not achieving the results that we need, that we aim to achieve. Maybe that's also set against the incredible growth in extremism within Israel, and arguably also in Palestine. So we need different tools. We have to take a step back and reassess. One of the challenges is training dialogue facilitators It needs a lot of training to train facilitators. It's not something that people can just step into and start doing, particularly when the divisions are so wide, so deep. One needs a lot of training in order to facilitate these difficult conversations. So I would say that, if I had to sum up four challenges, I would say depth. Much dialogue does not go deep enough in order to achieve the sort of change, the sort of transformation that in worldview. It's not just, it's certainly, I completely agree with Seth, completely not debate. But even when it reaches emotional spaces, that's all, we really need to go deeper and change worldviews. We need depth, but we also need breadth, because how do we do this at a scale that can create systemic change? How do we ensure that the dialogue leads to something else? So we get our groups to take action together, but even that it's small, it's local, but at least there's something that they do together as a result of the transformation they've experienced in the dialogue. And how do we use dialogue as really as a tool for change? So those are some of the challenges that we are grappling with in our work here in Jerusalem and all over Israel, Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was extremely interesting and super on point. All things that I think we want to talk more about. So over to you, Sabine.
Okay, first, thank you for having me, and it's really an honor to be here with these excellent and amazing experts on interreligious dialogue. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to learn from you and to hear your insights. So also having heard all of your positions, and I think I want to give you a brief insight to our experiences to impact evolution in interreligious dialogue. And before that, I want to take you to a total other country, to Germany. So, and giving a little bit context what we are dealing here with. So in Germany, it's a country where last year, I think the statistics showed us for the first time that the population that considers itself non-religious outnumbers is presented in percentage terms those who belong to one of the Christian churches. So there are more people who do not connect to a church or a synagogue or another religious institution than people who are in these institutions. And also we have a change in the self-image of Germany. So to see itself as a country of immigration, and it's now slowly establishing the appropriate legal and social mechanisms, and has with this ideas also to handle backlashes in the society. And another point is in Germany that the population, so to speak, slowly understands that the so-called secularization thesis from the sociology of religion, according to which religion would disappear and does not have any meaning in the reality, does not correspond to the reality now. And especially if you understand religion as a complex subject, which can be a system of beliefs, of symbols and interpretation. This is more than institutionalized religion in the forms of churches. So this is the context in Germany we have to handle, and we also do dialogue. And the Eugen Wieser Foundation is active in interreligious dialogue since 2005. We started with a dialogue between Christians and Muslims, and we, this foundation, published a book, a dictionary on the dictionary of dialogue, on the main words from Christianity and Islam. And from this, we developed workshops. So since 2015, the foundation has, in its educational work, developed a new approach, and we combine interreligious dialogue, or we speak more about interreligious literacy, with civic education. And we call it the interreligious democracy education. And the idea is to remove the topic religion off the corner of a denominational bondage or secular privatization and the narrative of dangerousness, deficit, or disappearance. And instead, religion and religious diversity are treated as legal, societal, and personal cross-cutting issues and resources for the real life of teachers and students. And it is about being able, so what do we want to, in our workshops, it is about being able to perceive and distinguish the multiple dimensions of religion. So we believe this is an important prerequisite for dealing with one's own religious and ideological perspective, as well as with people of other religious or non-religious orientation, in a tolerant and at the same time self-critical way. And what are we doing? We go to schools with a multi-religious team and conduct workshops on the topic of religious diversity. So in addition, we offer further trainings for teachers, and they learn here how religious diversity can be shaped in a very concrete and practical way at schools. So in the workshops, the pupils come together in religious mixed groups, and they have a special topic they have to work or to talk about. So maybe music or food, or even the bank system in Germany, also populism. And they come together and they learn, what does this topic has to do with religion? What has this topic to do with me? Or with where are intersections to my life, to my identities? Where do I speak as a religious person? What is a religious argument? And so on. And so they're getting in a conversation, or they have to produce something, maybe food, or we have also some houses or houses of dialogue. So they have a theme, a subject that have to build together. And so they learn to work together, but also to tolerate and let the opinions of other people stand as they are. And the trainers, they're working like a friction surface, so they can be asked very challenging questions, but also as a partner. So we have, as I said, a multi-religious team. So there is different possibilities to connect with the people. So, and we did like an impact evaluation of our program, and there we started to think about what does impact mean. So and also how is impact measured at all, and what counts as impact for us. And typically, as everyone said, it's important to reach as many people as possible, but we quickly realized that this is not our approach at all. We cannot do this. We cannot reach thousands of people. So we realized that with our program, in which we go to certain schools on a very regular basis, but the students keep changing, we can't be concerned with the effect of change in attitude or awareness. We can't do that in the setting at all. Instead, we create in these workshops about their living environment moments of reflection, of awareness of one's own patterns of thought and action, and in the next step to find a solution to deal with them. And we can then observe and measure and categorize this by means of participant observation and interviews with the participants. So our primary learning was to overthink the meaning of impact and maybe to be more, to focus on very personal, maybe also intimate relationships and workspaces where we have an intense session where we have maybe some people who have who learned something new and maybe changed not their attitude, but got some more awareness and more sensitivity to the topic. So I think looking at the time, thank you very much for this.
Yeah, no, sorry. I hate to cut you off, but we're running out of time, and we've got Linda still to go, and I want to leave a little time for questions. So thank you. I'm sure there's a lot of questions to be asked. So now, Linda, hopefully you are there, and we do have ready your slides to show, so we can, you can just direct us to move through them. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. I've eliminated some slides. So if it's all right, I'll try to share them.
Okay.
And ideally what I would like to do is just share, okay, so spend just a few minutes walking people through the data that we collected as part of this impact evaluation, and then reflect on some of the points that others have made as well about strengths and challenges related to dialogues based on all of our experiences and the research literature. So in this particular impact evaluation that we conducted in collaboration with Karuna Center and many of its partners on the ground in Rwanda, survivors, perpetrators, and bystanders of the '94 genocide were recruited from different rural communities in the 8 districts across Rwanda, which are represented by these blue dots here to make sure there was a fair representation of the country. And over the period of many months, participants took part in one of 2 types of contact-based programs. One of these being facilitated dialogues, depicted here in the circle. I took that photo from the back, where these were meetings, training trainers to facilitate dialogues about people's feelings and identities related to the genocide and their experiences during the genocide and their hopes for the future of Rwanda and prospects for reconciliation. And then depicted below was the example of the other type of contact-based program, trauma healing partners, where people were paired up to meet and provide each other with emotional support as they reflected on the past and sought to heal from the trauma of their experiences during the genocide. So they're both dialogue-based programs, but you can see they're very different in structure, one being much more of a group-based setting, talking about broader issues, and one being in a much more intimate setting, talking more about personal issues. So here's just like a little distribution to give folks a sense of how many folks participated in the dialogue and trauma healing partner groups, as divided by their self-identification as survivors, perpetrators, or bystanders. You might note the smaller number of perpetrators listed, but this is likely because many people who were active perpetrators may have identified as bystanders due to stigma associated with being identified as a perpetrator. I also just wanted to briefly mention that our participants in these programs completed surveys conducted through interviews before and after their participation in these programs. And given that there were low levels of literacy in many of these communities, the enumerators conducting these interviews with program participants read the survey questions aloud and used a pictorial scale like this one to help respondents indicate their responses to each question during the interviews. So here's just an example to give you a sense of what we found, focusing specifically on the data from survivors, where we asked them questions about overall, to what extent do they trust survivors, members of their own group, or trust bystanders or perpetrators in the Rwandan context, looking at their responses and potential change in their responses between pre-program surveys conducted before participation in the program and post-program responses, which were gathered after their participation in the program. And you can see that survivors' trust in their own group, trust in survivors, stayed pretty high. It increased a little bit, but it was generally pretty high, kind of a ceiling effect is what we would say. But you see the most marked change for experiences of trust in relation to bystanders and perpetrators among these survivors, suggesting that participation in these programs really contributed to building greater trust in members of other communities in the Rwandan context. We see really similar findings when we look at survivors' responses in terms of their willingness to integrate with bystanders and perpetrators in Rwandan society, that overall their willingness to integrate with other survivors is already quite high, that lighter blue line up here at the top, but we see significant increases in their willingness to integrate with bystanders and perpetrators following their participation in the program. We also made sure to separate out participants in these programs who either took part in the Dialogue Facilitators program or the Trauma Healing Partners program to see if we might see similar or different effects depending on the types of dialogues that took place. And we see similar patterns of effects for participants in both programs, that over the course of the program, these participants in dialogue were more likely to believe that most people in Rwanda can be trusted and that most people in Rwanda want to help others. So it's not necessarily only focused on their group's experiences in relation to each other, but generally how they perceive social relations in Rwandan society overall. So I'll stop sharing. And now if time allows, I would love to just share some swift responses in relation to the many strengths and some challenges that might be associated with the dialogue approach, particularly as supported by, not only what very much in line with what practitioners have said, but also from the broader research literature. In terms of the potential strengths of dialogue, intergroup dialogues give people the opportunity to feel heard and listened to, have their stories represented. Active witnessing, as Dr. Bernstein had mentioned, is a fundamental human motivation, that we want to have our experiences recognized and valued and heard. Dialogues can also give people tools for navigating difficult conversations and points of contention, finding strategies where they can learn to value the person and that person's perspective, even if they might not agree with that point of view. Intergroup dialogues can also be helpful to help people see that some progress or some change or transformation in complex settings might be possible, which can serve as a model for social relations more generally, and also serve as an alternative to violence or hopelessness that things will never change. But as many folks on this panel have already indicated, there are a number of challenges. I think anyone interested in implementing a dialogue program needs to keep in mind that these programs require skillful and active facilitation in order to achieve desired outcomes. This is not a light touch intervention. It actually involves a lot of energy to execute effectively, to create those types of psychological spaces where people can allow themselves to be vulnerable and honest, which is not always easy to achieve in the midst of heated conflict. Correspondingly, dialogues are not a one and done approach where you just have one day dialogue and assume everything will be fine after that. We really have to create dialogues that allow people to dive deeply into relevant issues in spaces where they can feel safe. And we have to acknowledge that cultivating those feelings of safety and people's willingness to trust each other takes time to develop, as both Dr. Akilu and Dr. Bernstein mentioned. And so, it requires longer programs, which, as Seth also mentioned, can be more expensive to implement. But at least based on what I've seen in many contexts, these higher costs in terms of expense also have the potential to yield greater benefits through allowing for deeper transformation and change. So we have to try to weigh the costs and benefits of, like, if this might cost more in terms of dollars, but it might yield deeper benefits in the long term. We also just have to keep in mind, though, that dialogues, in and of themselves cannot achieve sustainable peace because they don't occur in a vacuum. Their effects can be enhanced or undermined by what's going around, those broader social and political forces that surround them. But things that we can do to try to encourage positive effects from dialogues in practice is to have very clear ground rules for speaking and listening to each other, making clear, as Seth mentioned, that this is a space for dialogue and not debate, having facilitated turn taking to ensure that everyone is heard, that comparable time is granted to people on different sides of an issue to attend to some of those power imbalances, as Dr. Bernstein mentioned, and to also have very clear expectations set within the context, both in terms of how people in this space should be with each other, what types of behavior or expression will or will not be tolerated, but also to have clear goals about what we hope to achieve through the dialogue. Is the goal here to revisit the past, to address a current problem or resolve an ongoing conflict, to try to envision a shared future? I think the more concrete we can be about establishing what the goals are for a given dialogue, the more effective it will likely be. So I will stop there to try to save a few minutes for questions.
Thanks, Linda. That was terrific. I mean, you did an excellent, quick summary, and great to see the data and sort of get real, sort of an insight into your research methodology in the field. So I know there are probably a lot of questions online and certainly questions here. I mean, there's I have a number myself. I'll just start with one and then I'll hand it to Liz, and then we're going to, open it to you all. But a lot of you have mentioned sort of the preparation side, picking good partners, attending to the trauma, having a trauma-informed approach. In the range, Dr. Bernstein, Israel, Palestine, we talked about a lot of different contexts here of what that looks like, or what it, again, thinking guidance for future programming design of how you incorporate that into a program. That would be one question I have for Linda. We could start with you and then maybe go to Dr. Aquila, or Liz, you want to add?
So why don't we take a couple questions?
Yeah,
because I think that I'd want to ask what people have questions here, or any questions that are coming online. But just some, yeah.
I would like to ask if there's like a minimum set of rules for dialogue that go across everybody. Does that exist, or does it make sense to us? Something like that. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Is there existing standards?
Like a minimum set of rules.
A minimum set of rules. A minimum set of rules, and I think there are. I think Linda would be great.
Linda would be great.
I think we
take that list down.
Some other questions here. Yeah.
Hello. So I will say the question and you would repeat.
Yeah.
Thanks again to the panelists. My question actually goes back to the scale issue, scaling.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think Dr. Bernstein mentioned about it, especially in the constructive conflict realities, when these people who are actually engaged in the dialogue become some sort of like closed up groups who like participate in this dialogue process again and again because there is an issue of trust, and you cannot, and the process is sensitive, it can be spoiled easily, so etc. But then we really struggle to scale it up and scale it out. And I've heard one idea, this is the intra-societal dialogue, so not only like between groups, but then we can maybe increase the scale by inviting people like inside the society, especially when there is a physical boundaries and you have to like take people outside of the.
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to repeat this question. So what specifically is the question? The scale. The question is, how do you scale it? How do you scale it up and out? Any other, and then, yeah, Stacy? How to turn a what? Turn the heat up. Okay, the depth question, how do you go deeper? And then I think there was also, I earlier on said, this was to Dr. Neem, how do you actually what do you do for mental health? Like what are the things that you found are critical for this? So everybody doesn't have to answer every question. Answer the question that you feel like.
One question online as
Yeah,
well.
what is that?
So
difficulty of dialogue within uncertain, unstable governance and structures, I wonder if I might ask, in your experience, what best practices and ideas can be used when engaging in dialogue with and relationship building with communities that have lost faith in governance structures and who have become disillusioned with the dialogue process.
Okay, so basically a community that has lost, they've seen nothing happen and they're disillusioned and have no trust with the government.
Yeah, so that I'm just going to add one more. And again, maybe we'll go around to each of you and ask where you want to chime in on these different questions. Not, you don't at all have to answer all of them. Some of you, I think, are better positioned to answer others. But it's maybe related to Stacy and the scaling, but it's about the working at different levels. Seth specifically brought up working with leaders. Dr. Akilu also mentioned about, working, trying to connect up through the IPCR with the government. And I would just be interested about hearing your thoughts on at these different levels of how you can do that effectively. So with that, maybe let's go to
I would start with Linda and the question.
Start with Linda.
Basic standards.
Yeah. Okay, Linda, because you were kind of doing our work there at the end, outlining basic standards. So let's just start with you and to that question and any of the others that you would like to have any comments on.
All right, I will try to make it quick once again. I think there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind and keep in place, that even when there are power and status differences outside of the context, when people come together from different status positions or power positions into this space, we make clear that everyone is regarded as equals, that everyone has something valid to contribute and meaningful to say, regardless of their status outside of the situation. I think establishing that equal status in the context of the dialogues, giving space for people to feel that their presence and contributions are as legitimate as anyone else's is crucially important. One thing I did want to mention, though, related to like how to turn up the heat and how to get into depth, is also that, in the more heated context, it's going to take more time and energy to develop trust, right? So what we hope to achieve through dialogues will be dependent on kind of our starting point. I don't think it's possible to say that the same contact dialogue strategy will work in every context in the same way. But we need to take into account kind of those broader forces that are pushing groups toward competition and threat versus alliance building or peace building. Because the more obstacles we have, the more energy it will take to try to dismantle those obstacles to a point where we can engage people in a meaningful way. And that's where I think working at different levels really comes into play. I think oftentimes we envision like a dialogue program as being separate from all the other types of interventions that we might have. And I think what we need to do more of is envisioning how the benefits and strengths of different interventions can scaffold onto each other, so that as we are working to create dialogues in spaces, that there's also ways for people to disseminate their learnings and experiences from those dialogues with their neighbors to have broader societal change. So I'll just stop there for others to respond.
And they're all on, so they're able to unmute themselves.
So you're all able to unmute yourselves. Thank you, Linda. That was super helpful. So just Dr. Bernstein, Dr. Kilu, Seth, Sabine, just. Okay,
So,
Seth.
Go for it, Seth.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Sarah. Let me start by sharing this experience of what I have seen that I thought is what I consider to be a practice that we could adapt to make sure that affected communities or affected individuals can at least restore a relationship with their government or their leaders. There is nothing relieving to the affected people when they see a government leader coming out to their communities or to their local government area saying that this program is very important, is good, we appreciate it. And every single society that is affected, that is living in a post-conflict or a post-violent situation, is always looking up to the government, whether it's a government they trust or not, but they always look up to them to see what they are saying, if it is something that is restoring hope to them. And how does this happen? When you are implementing, or what we did when we were implementing what we are doing now, and what we did in Rwanda, it is making sure that we engage those government leaders right from the inception of the program, carrying out very important lobbying advocacies to make sure that they understand the purpose, objective, and the goal of the program, and show them that it is contributing to their own governance ambitions. Because the first thing they want to see is whether you are actually coming to help them rebuild their communities or rebuild their people that have been affected. If you don't do that very well, you are likely actually to cause harm than building peace. So when you get at least to get a disciple, I call them disciples of peace building from government settings, even if you get just a minor officer, a low rank officer from different government institutions, at maybe a district level, at maybe a provincial level for federal government, and you get them to send their own disciples to come and participate into your programs, they go back and report to their big officials. And they tell them that this thing these people are doing is very important. And before you know, they are the ones that are sent, or they call their leaders or their managers to come and participate into those community-based activities. So with that, bridging that gap between government officials and the affected community people is very important. It is the first step that you have to do to make sure that that relationship is restored. And they will only trust that that relationship is coming back when they see government leaders, be it small officials being sent by their big supervisors, coming to them and say, this is a message from my boss. That starts getting them to believe that they have a government that caters for them. And that relationship starts coming. And with the implementers, we actually start to gain confidence to say that we are also supported by the government because they appreciate what we are doing. And before you see, they start asking for expansion of the programs. Dr. Akilu can testify to this approach of what we are doing together in Nigeria today. We are being asked to expand our programs on early warning dialogue and mental health and psychological support, because we have tried to engage very well, right from the state officials, to get different government officials to participate into the forums of our beneficiaries where they are talking about what they have gained, getting government officials to listen to it. So
okay.
That kind of approach.
Thank you, Seth. And we are actually already over time. But I'm Dr. Bernstein. Were you about to say something before?
I was just going to say that I think one has to be aware of the timeline of dialogue. So you have to build trust before you jump into the really conflictual issues, but you also you can't wait too long. Because if you create a norm that everybody's become very, very good friends and they're not talking about the conflict, then they're not going to want to talk about the conflict because they'll be frightened of destroying their relationships. So you have to go with the flow of the dialogue of introducing the conflictual issues and going deeper at the right time. And that, of course, is part of why you need you need well-trained facilitators who can take the group through that process. In terms of Seth, listening to you, in my context, I think we have an Israeli government who have no interest in dialogue whatsoever, and you know, actively taking a different path. And on the Palestinian side, I think very little trust in their government to the extent that they have one, and certainly no trust in the Israeli government, and very little trust across the divisions or in the process of dialogue. So I think it's up to us dialogue practitioners to demonstrate that dialogue can produce change. And until we demonstrate that effectively, and as Linda says, getting the groups to then do something for the wider community to create change on the ground, I think it's going to be a slow process of rebuilding that trust.
So thank you, Dr. Neem. I'm going to call you because I have the mental health question, how do you know someone's a bad actor? And then there was some other question. So I'm going to call her next.
Dr. Akilu, you're still there, right? I think we'll just.
We need to go. Yeah, she had
to drop off. Okay, so we
I
are
am
call.
still here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you are?
We have to go.
Oh.
But I'm going to call
We're going to follow up. Okay. Yeah, I think we do. We are over time. So I want to thank you on behalf of all of us. Thank you all for joining us in your different locations in the evening. It was really interesting. We could obviously go on for a lot longer, and I feel like we've scratched the surface. But thank you all for agreeing to be with us. We really appreciate it.